Alright, Karina baby, today is the 17th and we're on a year full of stories. Let's see what's on for May 17th, because that's what today is. Small things. Small things. Apple seeds, a drop of rain, a bottom off my coat again. Oh, apple seeds, a drop of rain, one buttoned off my coat again. Birthday candles, purple plums, two pink band-aids on my thumbs. Ladybugs and crawling snails, three little pigs with curly tails, a tray of tarts, my favorite cup, four little puddles from a newborn pup. Butterflies and grains of sand, five-finger puppies on my hand, spools of thread, seashore shells, six boat singing from old church bells, six bats swinging from old church bells. Bulbs of paint, tiny spots, seven birds perched on chimney tops, house door keys, a fairy ring, eight sweet notes that I can sing, meowing kittens, flower seeds, nine bright wooden necklace beads, postage stamps, my bucket and spade, 10 musicians on parade. So that's small things. There's a lot of small things on there. There's the apple seeds and the drop of rain. There's sand. Sand is very small. Butterflies. Lots of small things in this world, baby. Mama loves you, Angel. And I am just so proud of you every second of every day. You know that? Mama loves you and Mama misses you. And I can't wait for this virus to be over because I can't wait to see you. The Tale of Mr. Todd. What is he? Looks like a fox, huh? I have made many books about well-behaved people. Now, for a change, I am going to make a story about two disagreeable people called Tommy, Brick, and Mr. Todd. Nobody could call Mr. Todd nice. The rabbits could not bear him. They could smell him half a mile off. He was a wandering habit, and he had foxy whiskers. They never knew where he would be next. One day he was living in a stack house on a Copic Grove, causing terror to the family of old Mr. Benjamin Bouncer. Next day he moved to a parlor window near a lake, frightening the wild ducks and the water rats. In winter and early spring he might generally be found in an earth amongst the rocks at the top of the Bull Banks under Oatmeal Crag. He had half a dozen houses, but he was seldom at home. The houses were not always empty when Mr. Todd moved out, because sometimes Tommy Brick moved in without asking leave. Tommy Brick was a short, bristly, fat, waddling person with a grin. He grinned all over his face. He was not nice in his habits. He ate wasps' nests and frogs and worms, and he waddled about by moonlight, digging things up. His clothes were very dirty, and he slept in the daytime. He always went to bed on his boots, and the bed which he went to bed in was generally Mr. Todd's. Mr. Timmy Brick could occasionally eat rabbit pie, but it was only very little young ones occasionally. When other food was really scarce, he was friendly with old Mr. Bouncer. They agreed in disliking the whiskered otter and Mr. Todd. They often talked over that painful subject. Old Mr. Bouncer was stricken in years. He sat in the spring sunshine outside the burrow in a muffler, smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco. He lived with his son Benjamin Bunny and his daughter-in-law Flopsy. He was a young family. Old Mr. Bouncer was in charge of the family that afternoon because Benjamin and Flopsy had gone out. The little rabbit bunnies were just old enough to open their blue eyes and kick. They lay in a floppy bed of rabbit wool and hay in a shallow burrow separate from the main rabbit hole. To tell the truth, old Mr. Bouncer had forgotten them. Oh no, he'd forgotten the baby bunnies. He sat in the sun and conversed cordially with Tommy Brick, who was passing through the wood with a sack of little spuds which he used for digging, and some mole traps. He complained bitterly about the scarcity of pheasants. Alright, so I wonder what he is. So there's some little baby bunnies, and there's a fox. Mr. Fox is the Todd, because Mr. Todd is the fox. And then there's this other guy. I don't know what he is, though. I think he's a mole rat? Or maybe a badger? Oh, he might be a badger. Look at his face. He might be a badger. So let's find out what Mr. Brick is. Eggs. Oh, pheasant eggs, and assured Mr. Todd of poaching them, and then otters have cleared off all the frogs while he was asleep in winter. I have not had a good square meal for a fortnight. I am living on pig nuts. I shall have to turn vegetarian and eat my own tail, says Tommy Brick. I was not much of a joke, but it tickled old Mr. Bouncer because Tommy Brick was so fat and stouty and grinning. Tommy Brick grinned some more and the smoke filled up the burrow, and Mr. Bouncer coughed and laughed, and Tommy Brick puffed and grinned. So he's sitting there, he's smoking, he's puffing and grinning as old Bunny just coughs and laughs. And Mr. Bouncer laughed and coughed and shut his eyes because of the cabbage smoke. When Flopsy and Benjamin came back, old Mr. Bouncer woke up. Timmy Brick and all the young rabbit babies had disappeared. Oh no. Mr. Bouncer would not confess that he had admitted anybody into the rabbit hole, but the smell of badger was undeniable, and there was round heavy footmarks in the sand. He was so disgraced. He was in disgrace. Flopsy wrung her ears and slapped him. Benjamin Bunny set off at once after Tommy Brick. There was not much difficulty in tracking him. He had left his footmarks and gone slowly up in the wind. Oh, so we missed this part here. So old Mr. Bouncer laughed and pressed Tommy Brick to come inside to taste a slice of seed cake and a glass of my daughter's Flopsy's cowslip wine. Tommy Brick squeezed himself into the rabbit hole with alacrity. Then old Mr. Bouncer smoked into the pipe and gave Tommy Brick a cabbage leaf cigar, which was so very strong that it made Tommy Brick grin more than ever, and the smoke filled the burrow. So that's the part that we missed. So the older bunny just let him in. Let the badger into his house. up the winding footpath through the wood. Here he had rooted up the moss and the wood sorrel. There he had dug quite a deep hole for a dog darnel, and set a mole trap. A little stream crossed the way. Benjamin skipped lightly over the dry foot. The badger's heavy step showed plenty in the mud. The path led to a part of the thicket where the trees had been cleared. There were leafy oak stumps and some seeds of blue helicrabs, and the smell of that made Benjamin stop. It was not the smell of followers. Mr. Todd's stick house was before him, and for once Mr. Todd was at home. There was not only a foxy flavor in proof of it, there was smoke coming out of the broken pail that served as a chimney. Benjamin Bunny sat up, staring at his whiskers twitching. Inside the stick house, somebody dropped a plate and said something. Benjamin stomped his foot and bolted. He never stopped till he came to the other side of the wood. Apparently Tommy Brick had turned the same way. Up to the top of the wall, there was again the marks of the badger. Look at the badger. So the badger stole the bunnies, and now the bunny's papa is trying to find his babies, because the grandfather just let somebody else walk into their house and walk away with the babies. Alright, so the footprints of a badger and some ravelings of a sake caught on a barrier. Benjamin climbed over the wall and into the meadow, and he found another mole trap nearly set. He was still up the track, and Tommy Brick. It was getting late in the afternoon. Other rabbits were coming out to enjoy the evening air. One of them, in a blue coat by himself, was busily hunting for dandelions. "Cousin Peter! Peter Rabbit! Peter Rabbit!" shouted Benjamin Bunny. The blue-coated rabbit sat up and perked his ears. Whatever is the matter, Cousin Benjamin? Is it a cat? Or John Stout Ferret? No, 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 he begged. My family Tommy Brick in a sack. You have seen them? Have you seen them? Tommy Brick, how many? Cousin Benjamin. 7, Cousin Peter, and all of them twins. Did he come this way? Please tell me quick. Yes, yes, not 10 minutes since. He said they were caterpillars. I did think they were kicking rather hard for caterpillars. Which way? Which way has he gone, Cousin Peter? He had a sack with him, something live in it. I watched him set up a mole trap. Let me use my mind, Cousin Benjamin. Tell me from the beginning. Benjamin did so. My Uncle Bouncer had displayed a lamentable want of discretion for his years, said Peter reflectively, but there was 2 hopeful coincidences. Your family is alive and kicking, and Tommy Brick has had refreshments. He will probably go to sleep and keep them for breakfast. Which way, Cousin Benjamin? Compose yourself. I know very well which way, because Mr. Todd was at home in the stick house. He has gone to Mr. Todd's other house, at the top of the bull banks. I partly know because he offered to leave any messages at Sister Cottontail's and said that he would be passing. Cottontail had married a black rabbit and gone to live on the hill. Peter has his dandelions and accompanied the afflicted parents, who was all of a waiter. They caused several fields to begin to climb the hill. The tracks of Tommy Brick were plenty to be seen. He seemed to have put down the sack every dozen yards to rest. He must be very puffed. We are He must be very puffed. We are close behind him by the scent of a nasty person, said Peter. The sunshine was still warm and slanting on the hill pastures, halfway up. Cottontail was sitting in her doorway with 4 or 5 half-grown little rabbits playing about her, one black and the others brown. Cottontail had the same Tommy Brick passing in the distance. After whether her husband was at home, she replied that Tommy Brick was resting twice while she watched him. He had noted and pointed to a sack and seemed doubled up with laughing. Come away. So they're meeting up. He's trying to figure out where his babies are. So he's talking to his cousin, and he's going to go and talk to his sister. And Tommy Brick is just talking to all the rabbits, even though Tommy Brick has rabbits on him. Right? Peter, he will be cooking them. Come quicker, said Benjamin Bunny. They climbed up and up and up. He was at home. I saw his black ears peeping up in the hole. They lived too near the rocks to quarrel with their neighbors. Come on, Cousin Benjamin. When they came near the woods at the top of the Bull Banks, they went cautiously. The trees grew amongst heaped up rocks, and there beneath the crag Mr. Todd had made one of his homes. He was at the top of the steep bank, and the rocks and the bushes overhung it. The rabbits crept up carefully, listening and peeping. This house was something between a cave, a prison, and a tumble-down pigsty. There was a strong door, which was shut and locked, and the setting sun made the window panes glow like red flames. But the kitchen fire was not alit. It was nearly laid with dry sticks, and the rabbits could see, when they peeped through the window. Benjamin sighed with relief. But there were preparations upon the kitchen table which made him shudder. There was an infamous empty pie dish of blue willow pattern, and a large carving knife, and a fork, and a chopper. At the other end of the table was a partly unfolded tablecloth, a plate, a tumbler, a knife and a fork, a salt cellar, mustard, and a chair. In short, preparations for one person's supper. No person was to be seen, and no young rabbits. The kitchen was empty and silent. The clock had run down. Peter and Benjamin flattened their noses against the window and stared into the dusk. Then they scrambled around the rocks and to the other side of the house. It was damp and smelly and overgrown with thorns and briars. The rabbits shivered in their shoes. Oh, my poor rabbit babies, what a dreadful place. I shall never see them again, sighed Benjamin. They crept up to the bedroom window. It was closed and bolted like the kitchen, but there were signs at this window that it had been recently opened. The cobwebs were disturbed, and there was freshly dirty footmarks upon the windowsill. The room inside was dark, that at first they could make out nothing, but they could hear a noise, a slow, deep, regular snoring grunt, and their eyes became accustomed to the darkness. They perceived that somebody was asleep on Mr. Todd's bed, curled up under a blanket. "He has gone to bed in his boots," whispered Peter. Benjamin, who was all a twitter, pulled Peter off the windowsill. So he made it to the house, right? And he prepped for his breakfast, and then he went to sleep. Where do you think the baby bunnies are? Because he's sleeping, so they got to be close by. Tommy Brick snored. Snoring continued. grunting and regular from Mr. Todd's bed, nothing could be seen of the young family. The sun had set, the owl began to hoot, and in the wood there were many unpleasant things lying about that had much better have been burned. Rabbit bones and skulls and chickens' legs and other horrors. It was a shocking place and very dark. They went back to the front of the house and tried in every way to move the bolt of the kitchen window. They tried to push it up to the rusty nail between the windows sashes, but it was of no use, especially without a light. They sat side by side outside the window, whispering and listening. In half an hour the moon rose over the wood and shone full and clear and cold upon the house, amongst the rocks, and in the kitchen window. But alas, no little rabbit bunnies were to be seen. The moonbeams twinkled on the carving knife and the pie dish and made a path of brightness across the dirty floor. The light shone a little door in a wall beside the kitchen fireplace, a little iron door belonging to a brick oven of that old-fashioned sort that used to be heated with faggots of wood. And presently, at that same moment, Peter and Benjamin noticed that wherever they shook the window, the little door opposite shook in answer. The young family were alive, shut up in the oven. Benjamin was so excited that it was a mercy he did not awaken Tommy Brick, whose snores continued somberly in Mr. Todd's bed. But there really was no very much comfort in the discovery. They could not open the window, and although the young family was alive, the little rabbits were quite incapable of letting themselves out. They were not old enough to crawl. After much whispering, Peter and Benjamin decided to dig a tunnel. They began to bury a yard or two lower the bank. They hoped that they might be able to work between the large stones underneath the house. The kitchen floor was dirty, that it was impossible to say whether it was made of earth or flags. They dug and dug and dug for hours. They could not tunnel straight on amongst the stones, but in the end of the night they were under the kitchen floor. Benjamin was on his back, scratching upwards. Peter's claws were worn down. He was outside the tunnel, shifting sand away. He called out that it was morning, sunrise, and that the jays were making a noise down below in the woods. Benjamin Bunny came out of the dark tunnel, shaking the sand from his ears. He cleaned his face with his paws. Every moment of sun shone warmer on the tops of the hill. In the valley there was a sea of white mist, and golden tops of trees showing through. Again from the fields down below in the mist there came the angry cry of a jay, followed by a sharp yelping bark of a fox. Those two rabbits lost their heads completely. They did the most foolish thing that they could have done. They rushed into their short new tunnel and hid themselves at the top of it under Mr. Todd's kitchen floor. Alright, so they have the two rabbits, right? And they notice that the other rabbits are in this oven, so they need to get into that oven. So parents will do anything for their kids, baby. They dug everything out, and now they're underneath that floor. They just need to break through. Right, and here they are now. It's morning. They're looking in the window. And now they're hiding in the hole because of jaybirds. The last of the dinner serves that had belonged to the grandmother, old Vixen Todd. Then the midgets had been very bad, and he had failed to catch a hen pleasant on her nest, and it had continued only contained only 5 eggs. 2 of them addled Mr. Todd. He had an unsatisfactory night. As usual, when out of humor, he determined to move houses. First, he tried the parlor window, but it was damp, and the otters had left a damp fish near it. Mr. Todd likes nobody leavings but his own. He made his way up the hill. His temper was not improved by noticing unmistakable marks of the badger. No one else grabs up the moss so wantingly as Tom Brick. Mr. Todd slapped his stick upon the earth and fumed. He guessed where Tommy Brick had gone to. He was further annoyed by the jaybirds, which followed him pleasantly. It flew from tree to tree and scolded, warning every rabbit within hearing that either a cat or a fox was coming up the pastures. Once, when it flew screaming over his head, Mr. Todd snapped at it and barked. He approached his home very carefully with a large rusty key. He sniffed at his whiskers, bristled. The house was locked up, and Mr. Todd had his doubts whether it was empty. He turned the rusty key in the lock. The rabbits below could hear it. Mr. Todd opened the door cautiously and went in. The sight that met Mr. Todd's eyes in Mr. Todd's kitchen made Mr. Todd furious. There was Mr. Todd's chair and Mr. Todd's pie dish and his knife and his fork and his mustard and his salt cellar and his tablecloth, and he had left it folded up in the dresser. All set out for supper, or breakfast, without doubt, that odious Tommy Brick. There was a smell of fresh earth and dirt badger, which faintly overpowered all smells of the rabbits. But what absorbed Mr. Todd's attention was a nose, a deep, slow, regular snoring, groaning noise coming from his own bed. He peeked through the hinges of a half-open bedroom door. Then he turned and came out of the house in a hurry. His whiskers bristled and his coat collar stood on the ends with rage. For the next 20 minutes, Mr. Todd kept creeping cautiously into the house and retreating hurriedly once again. By degrees, he ventured further in, right into his bedroom. When he was outside the house, he searched up the earth with fury. But when he was inside, he did not like the look of Tommy Brick's teeth. He was lying on his back with his mouth open, grinning from ear to ear, his snoring peacefully and as regularly, but one eye was not particularly shut. Mr. Todd came in and out of the bedroom. Twice he brought in his walking stick, and once he brought... Alright, so this fox got annoyed at his one house, so he wanted to go to his other house. Much like my dad, he had lots of property, and so he had lots of places that he could go to. So he's going home, and then he found out that the badger is in his house, and he doesn't know whether or not he's really sleeping. So he's trying to be careful and going in and out of his own house, trying to figure out if this badger is really sleeping in his bed. Now, he's already upset because there's someone else in his other house who left fish there, and the otters can't be leaving fish for Mr. Todd to find. He only likes his own things, right? So let's find out what happens. So in the coal scattered, but he thought better of it, and he took them away. When he came back after removing the coal scudder, Tommy Brick was lying a little more sideways, but he seemed even sounder asleep. He was an incredibly indulgent person. He was not in the least afraid of Mr. Todd. He was simply too lazy and comfortable to move. Mr. Todd came back yet again into his bedroom with a clothesline. He stood a minute watching Tommy Brick and listening attentively to the snores. They were very loud indeed, but seemed quite natural. Mr. Todd turned his back towards the bed and undid the window. It creaked. He turned round with a jump. Tommy Brick, who had opened one eye, shut it hastily. The snores continued. Mr. Todd's proceedings were peculiar and rather difficult because the bed was between the window and the door of the bedroom. He opened the window a little way and pushed out the greater part of the clothesline to the window sill. The best of the line with the hook at the end remained in his hand. Tommy Brick snores continuously. Mr. Todd stood and looked at him for a moment. Then he left the room again. Tommy Brick opened both eyes and looked at the rope and grinned. There was a noise outside the window. Tommy Brick shut his eyes in a hurry. Mr. Todd had gone out at the front door and round to the back of the house. On the way, he stumbled over the rabbit burrow. If he had any idea who was inside it, he would have pulled them out quickly. His foot went through the tunnel, nearly upon the top of Peter Rabbit and Benjamin, but fortunately he thought it was some more of Tommy Brick's work. He took up a coil of line from the sill, listening for a moment, and then tied the rope to a tree. Tommy Brick watched him with one eye through the window. He was puzzled. Mr. Todd fetched a large, heavy pail full of water from the spring and straggled with it through the kitchen into his bedroom. Tommy Brick snored indecently with rather a snort. Mr. Todd put down a pail beside the bed, took up the end of the rope with a hook, hastened it, and looked at Tommy Brick. The snores were almost epileptic, but the grin was not quite so big. Mr. Tommy gingerly mounted a chair by the head of the bedstand. His legs were dangerously near to Tommy Brick's teeth. He reached up and put the end of the rope with a hook over the head of the tester bed, where the curtains ought to hang. Mr. Todd's curtains were folded up and put away. Owing to the house being unoccupied, so was the counterpane Tommy Brick. Alright, so he's trying to set up something to probably pull the badger out of his bed, right? Because he wants him out of his house. So let's see what happens. Tommy Brick was covered with blankets only. Mr. Todd, standing on the unsteady chair, looked down upon the attentively. He really was at first puzzled, sound asleep. It seemed as though nothing would waken him, not even the flattening rope across the bed. Mr. Todd descended safely from the chair and endeavored to get up again with a pail of water. He intended to hang it from the hook, dragging over the head of Tommy Brick, in order to make a sort of shower bath, working by a string through the window. But naturally, being a thin-legged person, through vindictive and sandy-whiskered, he was quite unable to lift the heavy weight of the level and the hook and the rope. He was nearly overbalanced himself. The snores became more and more apellic. One of Tommy Brick's hind legs twitched under the blanket, but still he slept on peacefully. Mr. Todd and the pail descended from the chair without accident. After considering considerable thought, he emptied the water into the water basin and jug, and the empty pail was not too heavy for him. He slung it up, wobbling over the head of Tommy Brick. Surely there never was such a sleeper. Mr. Todd got up and down and up and down on the chair, and he could not lift the whole pailful of water once he fetched the milk jug and ladled quarters of water into the pail by degrees. The pail got fuller and swung like a pendulum. Occasionally a drip splashed over, but still Tommy Brick snored regularly and never moved, except in one eye. At last Mr. Todd's preparations were complete. The pail was full of water, the rope was tightly straightened over the top of the bed and across the window sill. The tree outside. It will make a great mess in my bedroom, but I could never sleep in that bed again without a spring cleaning of some sort, said Mr. Todd. Mr. Todd took the last look at the badger and softly left the room. He went out of the house, shutting the front door. The rabbits heard his footsteps over the tunnel. He ran round behind the house, intending to undo the rope, and in order for it to fall, the pailful of water upon Tommy Brick. I will wake him up with an unpleasant surprise, said Mr. Todd. The moment he had gone, Tommy Brick got up in a hurry. He rolled Mr. Todd's dressing gown into a bundle, put at the bed beneath the pail of water instead of himself, and left the room, also grinning immensely. He went into the kitchen, lit the fire, and boiled the kettle for a moment. He did not trouble himself to cook the baby rabbits. Alright, so he wanted to find out, the badger wanted to find out what the fox was doing, so the badger was curious. Curiosity sometimes gets you in a lot of trouble, trust me, I know. Mama knows. Curiosity got me in a lot of trouble. So, he is waiting to see what this fox is doing. He wants to see the clever plan of the fox. So the fox is trying to get the badger wet, so the badger will leave the house. When Mr. Todd got to the tree, he found that the weight and the string and the dragging of the knot and the tight that was past untying, he was obliged and growled with his teeth. He chewed and gnawed, and more than 20 minutes at last the rope gave way with such a sudden jerk that it nearly pulled his teeth out, and quick knotted him over backwards. Inside the house there was a great crash and splash, the noise of the rolling over and over, but no screams. Mr. Todd was mystified. He sat quite still and listened attentively. Then he peeped in at the window. The water was dripping from the bed. The pail had rolled onto the corner. In the middle of the bed, under the blanket, was a wet something, much flatter in the middle, where the pail had caught it, and it was across the tummy. Its head was covered by a wet blanket, and it was not snoring any longer. There was nothing stirring and a sound except a drip, drop of water trickling from the mattress. Mr. Todd watched in for half an hour. His eyes glistened. Then he caught a caper and became so bold that he even tapped at the window. But the bundle never moved. Yes, there was no doubt about it. It had turned out even better than had planned. The pail had hit poor Tommy Brick and killed him dead. I will bury that nasty person in a hole which he has dug. I will bring my bedding out and dry it in the sun, said Mr. Todd. I will wash the tablecloth and spread it on the grass in the sun to bleach, and the blanket must be hung up in the window, and the bed must be thoroughly disinfected and aired with a warming pan. The warm it with a hot water bottle. I will get soft soap and monkey soap and all sorts of soap and soda and scrubbing brushes and person powder and Cadillac and remove the smell. I must have a disinfectant. Perhaps I must have to burn sulfur, S-U-L-P-H-U-R, sulfur. Perhaps I must have to burn sulfur. He hurried round the house and got a shovel from the kitchen. First I will arrange the hole. Then I will dig out the person and the blankets. He opened the door. Tommy Brick was sitting at Mr. Todd's kitchen table, pouring out tea from Mr. Todd's teapot, Mr. Todd's teacup, and he was quite dry himself and grinning, and he threw the cup of scalding tea all over Mr. Todd. Then Mr. Todd rushed upon Tommy Brick, and Tommy Brick right with Mr. Todd amongst. Alright, so he didn't understand what happened. See, perception isn't reality. So the fox devised a plan to get the badger all wet. And now the fox is all wet with hot tea water, instead of the badger being all wet with cold water. So let's see what happens. The broken crackety, and there was a traffic battle all over the kitchen. To the rabbits underneath, it sounded as if the floor would give way at each crash and falling furniture. They crept out of their tunnels and hung about amongst the rocks and bushes and listened anxiously. Inside the house, the racket was fearful. The rabbit babies in the oven woke up trembling. Perhaps it was fortunate that they shut up inside. Everything was upset except the kitchen table, and everything was broken except the mantelpiece and the kitchen fodder. The crockery was smashed to atoms, the chair was broken, and the window, and the clock fell with a crash. And there was handfuls of Mr. Todd's sandy whiskers. The vases fell off the mantelpiece, and the canisters fell off the shelf. The kettle fell off the hob. Tommy Brick put his foot in a jar of raspberry jam, and the bubbling water out of the kettle fell upon the tail of Mr. Todd, and the kettle fell. Tommy Brick, who was still grinning, happened to be uppermost, and he rolled Mr. Todd over and over like a log out of the door. Then the snarling and worrying went on outside. They lay rolling in the bank, in a deep hill, bumping over the rocks. There was never be any love lost between Tommy Brick and Mr. Todd. As soon as the coast was clear, Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny came out of the bushes. Now for it! Run in! Cousin Benjamin, run in and get them! Well, I watched the door. Benjamin Bunny was frightened. Oh, they are coming back. No, they are not. Yes, they are. What dreadful bad language. I think they have fallen down the stone quarry. Still Benjamin hesitated, and Peter kept pushing him. Be quick. It's all right. Shut the oven door, Cousin Benjamin, so that he won't miss them. Discreetly there were lively things in Mr. Todd's kitchen. At home in the rabbit hole, things had not been quite comfortable. After quarreling at supper, Flopsy and Mr. Bouncer had passed a sleepless night and quarreled again at breakfast. Old Mr. Bouncer could no longer deny that he had invited company into the rabbit hole, but he refused to reply to the question and reproaches of Flopsy. The day passed heavily. Old Mr. Bouncer was very sulky. He huddled up to the corner barricades with a chair Flopsy had taken. Alright, so it took old Mr. Bouncer an entire day. In bunny days, that's a long time. That's like months in our time. An entire day to admit that, yes, okay, he let someone into the rabbit hole. But he wouldn't tell her who. Or why. He wouldn't tell her. He didn't want to tell her. Alright. Away his pipe and hidden the tobacco. What did he do? Flopsy had taken away his pipe and hidden the tobacco. She had been having a complete turn out of spring coming to reveal her feelings. She had just finished old Mr. Bouncer behind his chair and wondering anxiously what she would do next. In Mr. Tod's kitchen, amongst the wreckage, Benjamin Bunny picked his way to the oven nervously. Through the thick cloud of dust, he opened the oven door, felt inside, and found something warm and wiggling. He lifted it out carefully and rejoined Peter Rabbit. "I've got them. Can we get away? Shall we hide, Cousin Peter?" Peter picked his ears. Distant sounds of fighting still echoed in the wood. 5 minutes afterwards, 2 breathless rabbits came scampering away down Bull Banks, half dragging a sack between them. Bumpity over the grass, they reached the home safely, and rushed into the rabbit hole. And burst into the rabbit hole. Great was old Mr. Bouncer's relief and Flopsy's joy when Peter and Benjamin arrived in triumph with the young family. The rabbit bunnies were rather trembling and very hungry. They were fed and put to bed. They soon recovered. See, look at that. They had a tremendous experience and they soon recovered. A new long pipe, a fresh supply of rabbit tobacco was presented to Mr. Bouncer. He was rather upon his dignity, but he accepted. Old Mr. Bouncer was forgiven, and they all had dinner. Then Peter and Benjamin told their story, but they had not waited long enough to be able to tell the end of the battle between Tommy Brick and Mr. Todd. Alright, baby. There's a lot that's going to happen in life. Just like these rabbits got carried away by the badger, and then they had to be rescued, and then everybody had to forgive one another and move on with their lives. They all had dinner together and got to tell stories and just move on, right? In life is hard, right? Life is long and it's complicated and it's hard, and there's not already like always a right choice or a good choice, right? So you have to make the best choice possible, right? And sometimes the best choice possible is choosing to love somebody more. Alright, so say someone says something to you or does something to you and it hurts your feelings. Don't react in anger. Don't react in, hurting somebody else back. Don't hurt them back, because when somebody hurts you, it's because they're hurting so much themselves already. That's why Mama never really got upset when she got hurt but I always forgave. And moved on from the situation, because I realized if someone's hurting me, it's because their heart's heavy and they're hurting themselves, right? And Mama always chose to love more. You don't hurt yourself, you don't hurt others, and you try not to let other people hurt you. Don't sacrifice yourself into a corner. Don't sacrifice yourself into a hole. Don't sacrifice yourself. Don't sacrifice yourself by not being able to break someone else's reality. It's okay. It's okay to be like, no, this didn't happen. That's okay. It's an okay thing to do. Alright? But there's a lot of things that happen in life. Just like these rabbits, they got stolen. These baby rabbits got stolen. And it was because the grandfather let a badger into the house because he wanted someone to talk to and smoke with. And then the rabbits got taken away. And then they had to be rescued. Right? They had to be rescued and taken back home. And then the mama was so happy to see her babies and Papa saved them. And now they're all having dinner together and telling stories, and everybody's forgiven. Things happen in life, and life is hard, but you have to forgive. You don't have to forget, you just have to forgive. Because if you don't forgive, you're hurting yourself more. Don't hurt yourself by not forgiving people. Right? As always, honey, Mama loves you. Mama will always love you. Like Papa used to say, Mama's Papa's son, Papa's my moon, and you are a rainbow baby. That meaning has so much because you're a rainbow. You really are. You're a rainbow baby through and through. Mama waited forever for you, and I love you, and I adore you, and I will always love you, and I will always adore you. No matter what you do. Whether you want to be a housewife and homemaker like me and have that as your ultimate success, whether you want to work outside the home and become a doctor, whether you want to, whatever you want to do, be an artist and paint, be a photographer, be a graphic designer, be a world traveler, whatever you want to do, I will be absolutely just stunned by you. I just love you. I just love you so much, and just protect your body and don't hurt it. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't do anything like that. Don't drink the coffee, don't drink alcohol, don't smoke cigarettes, don't smoke anything because it hurts your lungs. Just protect yourself and protect your body. Don't ever do anything like that. I know you're still so little, you're only 5, but and always let your pennies add up. Alright? Don't be spending your money on just stuff that you don't need. Let your pennies add up into dollars and let the dollars add up into a lot, okay? There's so many things I wanted to teach you, and there's so many things I'm going to teach you. It's just a matter of time, and it just has to be patient. And I'm trying so very hard to be patient. Mama is a very patient person, and right now the entire world is shut down. I just have to be patient. I love you, Karina. I will always, always, always love you, no matter what. Because you're my baby, and I created you, and I love you. You know, I love you. I love you so much. I love you. And I miss you. And I love you. I can't wait to see you. I love you.